Welcome to the Pregnancy Help Podcast. I'm Christine Grimmett. I'm here with Danielle White, General Counsel at Heartbeat International, and we're going to be doing some of these regular legal update episodes since there's just so much going on right now in the pro-life world on the legal front. And Danielle will be bringing in different guests to help us understand the who, what, when, where, and why behind all that's happening. And a quick reminder to our listeners that Pregnancy Help News is just another great way to stay up to date on the news. And you can click on the link in the show notes to sign up for our weekly updates. So Danielle, let's get started with the what and the who of this episode. What are we going to be discussing today? And then who have you brought on to help us with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Christine. I'm excited to do another legal update here. This one may feel a little bit delayed because to get some background on why we're doing this, you have to go back a few years. Our listeners will probably not forget after the Dobbs case came down when so many pregnancy centers were victims of aggression by the pro-abortion movement, by those who disagreed with the Dobbs case. So they experienced vandalism and some even firebombing. So there were some cases that were pending after that to address that violence. And, cases take time. So we wanted to swing back and kind of go back to that and see what came of that. So I have here with me today Jeremy Dys from First Liberty Institute, who has really been on the forefront of one of those cases. So Jeremy, thanks for being with us here today.
It's so good to join you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So actually, I'll just back up a little bit. At the time that we're recording this, the Supreme Court just recently granted cert in the Childs v. Salazar case, which is a case involving a counselor who would like to work with clients who may be confused about their gender and would like counseling that would help them to be able to be more comfortable with their biological gender. The state of Colorado says that that's not okay, and Alliance Defending Freedom has represented that counselor. That case has made its way all the way to the Supreme Court on free speech grounds. Heartbeat filed an amicus brief in that case, and First Liberty represented us in filing that amicus brief. And one of the things we highlighted is all of the targeting that pregnancy centers have faced merely because they don't perform or refer for abortions. So Jeremy did a great job in that brief, really outlining the aggression we've faced, not just from the vandalism and the physical violence, but also from our elected officials who are targeting pregnancy centers merely because of their position on abortion. So if you are interested in reading an amicus brief, that would be a great one to go back and read. And it's very timely since the court just granted cert. So Jeremy's going to share a story today of a pregnancy center who fought back after that targeting. But before that, Jeremy, just tell us a little bit about First Liberty and some of your own background.
Yeah, First Liberty Institute is a nationwide religious liberty law firm. All we do is defend religious liberty for all Americans, and that takes us in a variety of contexts to make sure that our religious liberty is robust in our marketplace, within the public arena, within our houses of worship and our religious institutions, our schools and our military. Wherever you're going in this country, we want to make sure that your religious liberty follows. It's called First Liberty Institute for a reason. It's the first freedom that we have in our Constitution, the First Amendment. And we've been dedicated now for over 2 decades trying to make sure that religious freedom does not constrict, but rather grows and expands. Because when religious freedom grows, all of our freedoms grow. I've had the privilege of being here now for 11 years, so it's kind of exciting to know that the better part of my career has been spent in the defense of religious freedom. But I came out of an organization that was dedicated also to religious freedom, but also heavily on the pro-life issues. I did a lot of work in West Virginia with the pro-life community out there and around the country. And so I love to be able to work alongside of these incredible organizations. As I tell my friends that are heads of pregnancy care centers, God has called them well for those organizations. He didn't really constitute me very well to be one of those directors. I'm much more better used as an aggressive tool as a lawyer in those universes. But I so love the work that you guys are doing that I'm proud to stand alongside of you to make sure that you have the freedom to stay open and to do your important work. So whether that's working with Heartbeat International, as we've had the chance to do multiple times with that amicus brief and writing back to kind letters from senators like Elizabeth Warren that's said with a bit of tongue in cheek, or just simply working with the network of pregnancy care centers around the country to make sure that, someone stands up for their right to be able to do what God has called them to do in their neck of the woods. That's what First Liberty is all about. We want to make sure you're free to do it.
Yeah, those of you who know Jarrell, our president, know that he's fond of saying that you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And that has increasingly become the case for pregnancy centers over the last, the last 10 or 15 years, especially. And one thing that we often talk about is just how grateful we are for those partners like First Liberty Institute who are willing to step into that legal arena, because it is intimidating when there's a sense that pregnancy centers are being targeted legally, perhaps for lawsuits and other things. And so it's just very, very helpful to know that if these centers take a risk, if they put themselves out there, it's so funny how just offering free, compassionate, life-affirming services to women is now risky, but there's a measure of risk that's involved with it because people don't like what we're doing. Not everybody likes what we're doing. So, but it's such a blessing to know that you will stand in the gap. And Jeremy, I'm only 5'2", and so when I stand next to you physically, I'm real glad that you're standing in the gap. Because Jeremy's very tall.
You remind me of my mother was 5'2" as well, and I stand to 6'3", and my sons are now starting to tower over me. But I always told my mother when I hit that growth spurt that no matter how often I have to look down at her, I will always look up to her. And so I feel the same way about you, Danielle. I will always look up to you.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. All right. So give us an overview of the Heartbeat of Miami case. How did you get involved with that? What was the nature of the attack? Kind of take us from the beginning.
Yeah, well, Heartbeat of Miami, which is no relationship to Heartbeat International, legally or otherwise, just happens to share a similar name and a long history in Miami. It's a wonderful organization that has several different campuses of pregnancy care centers that they operate throughout the greater Miami-Dade County area. Well, let's go back to when the Dobbs decision came down, and that was kind of a rough time. You'll remember that coming not only out of COVID and some of the recovery that we were trying to make as a nation after being shut down for so long, but then we had the controversy of the leaked opinion, the violence that came out after that, the protests, and I kind of use air quotes when I say protests related to that opinion. The final opinion itself, when it came out, there was another wave of violence after that opinion. And that's where we meet our characters with Heartbeat of Miami down there after that decision came down in late June of, I think it was 2022, if I recall. So here we are. That decision comes down, overturns Roe v. Wade largely, and people just lose their mind. And you'll recall that there were fire bombs that are being thrown through windows of pregnancy care centers, bricks being thrown through the windows. Pregnancy care centers in the Boston area had statues of the Virgin Mary vandalized outside of their clinic. They had light bulbs were filled with red paint thrown against their walls to simulate blood, and just all kinds of intimidating acts taken against them. And our friends down in Miami received similar threats as well. Not just Heartbeat of Miami, but 2 or 3 other clinics, one in the Hollywood, Florida area, another one over on the west coast of Florida. They all received some form of intimidation and vandalism. Our clients, Heartbeat of Miami, received their entire wall of their clinic was vandalized after the vandals disabled their security cameras. They then vandalized the wall with, if abortions aren't safe, then neither are you. They misspelled a word in there, which I've always found kind of funny, but nonetheless, the intimidation was real. And so they came in the next day, which I think was actually the 4th of July, if I remember. They had to clean up that entire mess. And the staff was just trembling with fear. I mean, here are largely people that are donating their time to serve this community in a rough environment anyway. It made all the more difficult because of the heightened problems around the country and the rhetoric that had just gone through the roof. Now they had to come into work not knowing if they're going to meet with a brick being thrown through their window, a Molotov cocktail following them, or if someone was watching in the bushes waiting to pounce upon them. This was the real fear that they felt during that time. And not only them, but many clinics around the country felt the same way. But we eventually were able to get a hold of Heartbeat of Miami and explain the rights that they have under a law called the FACE Act, which I think we'll talk about here in a moment. And eventually we were able to partner with them and the Attorney General of the state of Florida to vindicate some of their rights, to hold the vandals accountable. And our whole point was simply to say, if you're going to pick up a brick or a can of spray paint to voice your disagreement with these people, the law is going to hold you accountable. And thankfully it did.
That's great. That's a really good intro. Thank you for that. So what was that process like? Can you help us understand the Attorney General's involvement in the case and how it proceeded? Just walk us through that.
Yeah, to understand this enough, we need to get in a little bit into the weeds of the FACE Act because it is important to set the predicate. Now, the FACE Act is called the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, but we're just going to call it the FACE Act. That came into law under President Bill Clinton, and that was during a time that was not a great time for our country and certainly not the pro-life community. There was some violence towards abortion clinics around the country and abortionists themselves. And I think we would all agree and condemn those activities. But they passed this law called the FACE Act. I think it was Senator Grassley managed to include inside the FACE Act a protection also for churches. And what the FACE Act stands for is that if you're going to interfere or intimidate or prevent access to a reproductive health care facility or a church as well, you're going to face, you have a private right of action. That organization has a private legal right of action. They can file a lawsuit against you to hold you accountable. Well, the law also provided the state attorney general, as well as the attorney general of the United States, the right to not only provide criminal sanctions against the vandals, but in the case of the state attorneys general, they could seek penalties, financial penalties, civil penalties against those vandals on behalf of the citizens of that state. And so when we brought this issue to the attention of the Attorney General of the state of Florida, Ashley Moody, who's now the United States Senator for the state of Florida, she was eager to jump into the defense of the pregnancy care center there in Florida, and not just our client, Heartbeat of Miami, but all the clinics that had been vandalized in the state of Florida by those vandals. Now, it was also convenient that the Biden administration, the Department of Justice, had found the vandals. It was important to have a name associated with the criminals in that situation so we could actually have a defendant we could sue, or in this case, several defendants that we could sue. And as soon as they announced that indictment, we were able to piggyback on that with our own civil lawsuit on behalf of Heartbeat of Miami, but also the state of Florida was also to file their own lawsuit seeking civil penalties against those now felons as well.
Yeah, Jeremy, as you were talking, I was thinking a little bit about, pregnancy centers are really accustomed to helping people in need. They're accustomed to taking somebody who's in crisis and holding them by the hand and providing them resources and help. And I think it's not really in our DNA to want to go and affirmatively sue somebody. It doesn't seem very nice. What do you think about that? What would you say to someone who might be reticent to exercise these rights because it seems so foreign maybe to how they normally think about how they serve the community?
Yeah, look, this country that we operate in has given us the power as citizens to be able to run our country. I mean, our politicians work for us. We don't work for them. And there are appropriate rules and ways that the government should act. And when it acts correctly, as limited by our Constitution and ordained by our state and federal laws, then good for them. But when they fail to follow those rules, it's incumbent upon us as citizens to correct that behavior as well. But also when Congress enacts a law that allows and provides the right to people to be able to seek some sort of redress of grievance, whether that is through a civil filing of a tort action, if you've been civilly injured somehow in a car accident or something like that, you're able to seek compensation for those things, for the violence that has been done to you, the wrong that has been done to you. Well, the same thing extends to our friends and in religious institutions as well through the FACE Act when it comes to reproductive health care facilities. By the way, just as an aside, the FACE Act was vigorously defended by the left. Why? Because they wanted to maximize the protection for abortion clinics all over the country and the abortionists that operated them. And so they broadly defined the definition of reproductive health care facility, which is what the language of the statute. And so it really became very clear in the law that a reproductive health care facility was pretty much anyone who used the word pregnancy inside of a building. It's a little bit more narrow than that. But if you had any connection to counseling, pregnancy tests, ultrasounds, any kind of reproductive health care that could be broadly defined, you were going to be protected by the FACE Act. And so for our part, it was a little bit of just simply education on our behalf towards other pregnancy care centers around the country. You're so right, Danielle. There's such a helper mentality within the pro-life community that I think it was difficult for people to kind of get their mind around the other way to be helped at times. But as we made the information clear to them, people began to understand why that law exists and some of the benefits that may come from that law as well. There are also burdens under that law. I'm very well aware of that, and we can talk about some of the problems that law has been used for. But I should point out that this was the first lawsuit that a state attorney general had ever brought on behalf of a pregnancy care center in the country. So Ashley Moody plowed new territory on that lawsuit. And I think we were among the first lawsuits to bring a lawsuit on behalf of a pregnancy care center under the FACE Act as well. So for many years, several decades in fact, that law had been used almost exclusively to punish the pro-life community. But here we were able to turn that around and use the very law that was meant for punishing problems in to use it the correct way, to make sure that the pro-life reproductive health care facilities were also receiving the same benefit of federal law.
Yeah, that's amazing. What was the ultimate resolution in the case, or where is it now? Give us an update.
Yeah, thankfully, we were able to negotiate a mediated settlement with the felons. And so the four vandals that had been a part of this, there were two that had come to the clinic to spray paint the walls. There were two others that had come to the gala of Heartbeat in Miami and leafleted the property with all kinds of propaganda, shouting obscenities and screaming and interrupting their gala. Just a very scary situation for them. We sued all of those defendants, but then were able to sit down and talk to them and avoid the need for any kind of trial if they agreed to take a guilty plea in their federal criminal trial. And they all, three of them agreed to that criminal sanction. So they are three felons. The fourth one decided that she wanted to go through the trial. And lo and behold, the jury pronounced her a guilty felon as well. And so there was a different level of provisions that kicked in for her when it came to resolving things with our client. But at the end of the day, we have four felons that will no longer be able to vote, own a weapon, do a number of things that felons are not allowed to do anymore. They also have all had to pay some level of financial penalty directly to Heartbeat in Miami and as well as some of the other pregnancy care centers in the state of Florida. So they've become donors now to the pregnancy care centers in the state of Florida. They've also had to write, the ones that agreed to the plea deal had to say in open court a statement of apology for their behavior. And so they had to acknowledge their wrongdoing and state in open court. The fourth one has to send a letter to our client acknowledging her problems and wrongdoing and asking their forgiveness as well, which of course, our client is only quick to provide to them. Thankfully, because of the state of Florida's lawsuit, which is a separate lawsuit, they were actually able to hold a much stronger wedge against them with the higher financial penalties. Had they gone all the way through with the trial and been convicted in the in the civil proceeding under the state attorney general's action, they were looking at each individual defendant was looking to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in civil penalties, which cannot be dispersed in bankruptcy. And so that would have been against them for a long time. Because of the mediation, they were able to cut that down quite heavily in exchange for those felony plea deals that we were able to secure on their behalf. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of money exchanged, not hundreds of thousands, but still thousands of dollars that have come out. And those monies have gone from the hands of the vandals and into the hearts and the work of these pregnancy care centers around the state of Florida.
Yeah, and it's those vandals did inflict damage on the property of the center. What I know that a lot of times, settlement things are confidential, and so I don't know how much you're at liberty to say. But is your sense that the money that was paid back to the center was enough to cover the financial damage that was done to them?
Yeah, thankfully, and I don't want to downplay the damage here, but it was just paint on top of paint. And so there was some washing of the walls and some repainting that had to be done. But that doesn't really account for the emotional harm that befell these pregnancy care centers in the state of Florida, and our client included. Still to this day, our client, Martha Avila, who's the director of Heartbeat in Miami, she will oftentimes break down in tears with me, just how emotional that situation was. Volunteers that were scared to come into work for months at a time, and still sometimes look over their shoulder as they're walking into their clinic to know, what their surroundings are like and if they're going to be the target of an unfair attack again. And so are you ever able really to financially compensate for those kinds of things? No. But it was less about the financial recovery of the actual injury that occurred, the physical injury, the paint and all that. and more about sending the message to those who would rather express their disagreement through violence rather than what our country prefers, simply the exchange of ideas. And so holding them accountable criminally, making sure that they are all now pronounced felons, and so they'll be denied certain civil liberties that all of us would rather enjoy. And as well, having to hit them at the pocketbook with civil penalties and agreed upon settlements. That's an important element in the case of our clients there in Miami.
Yeah, and I think that you're absolutely right, Jeremy. There's just no way to really restore a sense of safety and security that was taken from the center director, from Martha, from her team, from her volunteers. And is that kind of the rationale behind the apology component to try to restore some of that? I mean, there's just a justice component, obviously, that when you wrong someone, you ought to apologize. Do you think that those apologies did anything to restore that sense of security, or?
I think it did quite a bit for Martha on her side of things, just to have a chance to confront, if not face to face, then at least require the individuals that had done the vandalism to have to be confronted with their own actions and have to think through the harm that it caused to the people that they inflicted that violence against. Where does that stand in the future? You know, God only knows the answer to that question. Our job was simply to be faithful in the task that we were assigned in this situation, which was to apply the law to them. And perhaps that level of justice will lead to a greater sense of justice in eternity. I hope and pray that will be the case. I know my clients do as well. But for our purposes, to hold them accountable for their actions and to allow the law to be that school teacher that we hear so much about, to bring them to an understanding of their wrongdoing and hopefully change their behavior, not just only for this life, but for the life that is to come, is an important element of what our clients wanted to accomplish in this case as well.
I think it's just such a critical win, what you have done and what Heartbeat of Miami has been willing to stand up and do too. I think it's so critical. I mean, there were dozens of pregnancy centers, right? And this is one. This is kind of hot off the presses. I just saw a headline this morning that the new FBI director is releasing some files about the targeting of Christians that occurred under the previous administration. I'm curious whether we might see anything in there about pregnancy centers. And so if there's a center listening who was vandalized and still hasn't received justice, what can they do? Is it too late? Has too much time passed? What can they do to try to also receive justice?
Well, I would encourage them to reach out to us and let us evaluate whether or not that statute of limitations has run or not. I sitting here, I can't recall the exact timeline for that statute of limitations, but don't assume that has passed you over, that the justice could still be obtained for you. While this was going on at the very beginning, we reached out to multiple pregnancy care centers around the country, several up and down the eastern seaboard. In fact, I presented testimony in Congress about this situation as well. And the sad reality was that even though we represented multiple pregnancy care centers from Florida to Virginia to Massachusetts and New York, we represented a bunch of these organizations. We really couldn't do anything until the vandals were themselves identified.
Right.
And at that time, we had a Department of Justice that had a motivation politically to not name them. And so whether or not they were known or unknown, I don't know. And I certainly hope that they simply were just not able to find the people who had done the violence to these organizations. But if I ever did know their names and I was represented, I would be happy to hold them accountable with whatever means I could hold them accountable with. And so if that is still the situation for you, and by the way, I don't want to suggest that that's all over. I think these protests continue in areas of the country we don't even know about. And so if that has happened to you, that there has been a protest nearby to you where they have intimidated or interfered with access to your reproductive health care facility, meaning your pregnancy care center, call us. Let us evaluate whether or not this is something that we can hold individuals accountable for. Why do we want to do that? Because we want to make sure that the people that you are intending to reach have the ability to actually reach the resources that you have been provided with, giving to them. And so that's really the motivation behind everything that we do. Yes, we want their religious liberty protected, and most of these organizations are run by religious missions. But we want to make sure that your mission is successful, that you can actually get to the people that you're trying to serve in your community. And if people are interfering with access to that, well, the law needs to stand in the way of that interference.
Yeah, I was just hearing someone speaking this week saying that that they're concerned that Dobbs Day may become kind of an annual opportunity for mischief for these folks. So it's a potent reminder that the vandalism isn't really necessarily done, and certainly we don't live in fear of that. But just to be aware of Jeremy and the work that he's doing to try to protect those rights if you were to find yourself in that situation. So, Jeremy, what surprised you about this case?
There are a number of surprises, and what I don't want to do is get too far into the weeds of conversations I've had with some of my clients here and there. But I guess it does surprise me on occasion, and I think you've helped me understand it a little bit better, actually, Danielle, in this conversation. When presented with the option to be able to hold these individuals accountable, how rare it is for certain organizations to want to do that, and whether that's just simply a misunderstanding of the turning of the cheek, or something of more fear than that. I'm not entirely sure what that is. And I don't have anybody specific in mind that I'm violating any conversations with. But it is surprising to me how rare it is that when the laws are duly passed for your benefit, when presented with the ability to engage those laws, then there's a reluctance to say, well, the access to the courts are not for me, they're for somebody else. Well, I don't think that that's true. And what bothers me the most about that as an attorney, and this is where the surprise comes in, is that there's a little bit of freedom that dies in that. You know, I'm not really worried about the cases that come our way. We win most of the cases that we get involved with. I always get worried about the cases I don't even know about or I can't bring. That's where I get frightened. And if we're not willing to stand up for our rights, well, we're going to eventually lose those rights. And they don't come really at a loss. We don't lose them really in one fell swoop, meaning there's not a massive invasion and we somehow lose them immediately. More often than not, we lose our rights through one small concession at a time. Freedom dies a death of a million cuts. So let us be very vigilant about ensuring that the rights that have been given to us, not because Congress is so wise, I think there's ample objective evidence to the contrary on that point, but because God has seen fit to provide us a very freedom-loving country, one that is respectful, especially of the religious rights that have been given to us by our Creator. We should respect that as well and see no qualms about seeking resolution on those rights within a court of law.
Yeah, in working with pregnancy centers, I've noticed that they might not necessarily fiercely fight for their own rights, but they will fiercely fight for the women they serve. And so I think one message I might add to everything you're saying, which is so great, is that if a center has the opportunity to fight for the women that they serve, to think about it from the perspective of a woman who's seeking help from a pregnancy center and how frightened she would feel to come to a pregnancy center in the first place if it has broken glass and red paint all over it. And so I think it's important for us to remember that, yeah, we've got to protect our own rights. Absolutely we do. But we also have to think about her and her rights and her right to come and hear this life-saving message that pregnancy centers are offering her and to receive the services that change lives. They change lives. So we can't let those who would act in such vile ways scare away our clients. And if there's anything I know about pregnancy centers, they are fiercely protective of the women they serve. So,
well, I feel the same way as an attorney, by the way. I'm fiercely protective of my clients.
Yes.
In fact, I've got an ethical obligation to zealously advocate on behalf of my clients. And I'm so glad that the rules of ethics have unlocked that natural characteristic of mine, and that I can feel free to zealously advocate on behalf of my clients, because that's what I am best at doing. So if nothing else, would you please let me freely exercise the gifts that God has given to me so that I can advocate on your behalf so that you can help other people as well? I know that sounds almost backwards, and I'm the crazy guy that loves to go into a courtroom. I know, I get it, I understand. But that's the narrow world that God has called me to do.
Right. Yeah. And we all have to use our gifts and talents. I mean, I tell pregnancy center directors all the time who will say to me, like, how do you do what you do? How do you operate in the courtroom? And in these cases, it just seems so scary. And I'm like, listen, I'm more intimidated by sitting knee to knee, face to face with a woman in crisis like that. I don't know how they do what they do. And so it's just such a testament to how God can bring all of our gifts and talents together to serve these people. And I think that's so beautiful.
Yes, and amen to every word you just spoke there. I was talking to my friend Kurt Cameron not long ago, and I joked around that we're all part of the body of Christ, and it falls to me to be the armpit. And said, no, look, you're not the armpit, man. You are the brass knuckles of the body of Christ.
Yeah.
And I received that in Jesus' name and said, okay, that's fine. I'm happy to go out there and be that brass knuckles, because again, I would really rather wrangle with somebody in a courtroom than having to sit down and deal with such an emotional situation. I'm so thankful for my friends in pregnancy care centers that are equipped to do that. That is not the universe that God has equipped me to be in either.
Yeah. So we've talked about the FACE Act, and we've talked about its importance for protecting pregnancy centers, for protecting the women who are seeking the services there. But there's also a lot of discussion in this new Trump administration of repealing the FACE Act. So if the FACE Act were to be repealed, would that now leave pregnancy centers exposed to these acts of violence? Would they be left without recourse?
They would not be left without full recourse, but they certainly would lose one option that is available to them right now, which I would be disappointed about. So look, the rules, again, criminal rules are still there. The criminal laws are still what they are, and they're not going to be repealed under this FACE Act. But the right of private action, that would go away as well. And look, I fully understand where this situation is going. I recall well, in fact, I sat next to the gentleman that was arrested under the FACE Act during the Biden administration as a pro-life protester, when he was protesting outside of a clinic, I think in Pittsburgh, if I remember correctly. I love that dear brother. I'm so sorry for the situation that happened to him. I think that was a travesty how that occurred that way. I think it was an abuse of the FACE Act, quite frankly. Same with the protesters in Tennessee that were peacefully protesting inside or in the hallways there, and had some negative application there as well. I think that was an abuse of that process as well. But I understand friends of mine like Chip Roy and others who are concerned about that abuse and want to see action taken to protect our pro-life protesters as well. I would only simply turn and offer our example as how the law is supposed to be used. It is supposed to be used when there is a true interference, a true intimidation, a true effort to prevent pro-life reproductive health facilities and churches, I might add, that are also protected by the FACE Act, other houses of worship. That is a good thing in our country. I'll leave it to the brilliant minds in Congress to debate that issue. I've had those conversations publicly and privately with them. I understand both sides of that issue. But to your point, to your question, I don't want our pregnancy care center directors listening to this podcast to come away with an understanding that if that law goes away, all hope is lost. That is not true. In fact, the law still is the law. You are not allowed to go onto private property and vandalize it. And if you do, if you pick up a brick, if you pick up a can of spray paint, you should and will be held accountable for that action. It will be a different level of accountability than what the FACE Act will provide to us, but you still have rights under the law. And we're happy to help you understand what those rights actually are.
That's great. Jeremy, where can pregnancy centers go to learn more about First Liberty and its good work?
Yeah, I'd encourage them to go to firstliberty.org, 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 and you can read all about the Heartbeat of Miami case. We got our own page of that case on our website, including all the great legal work that we did on it. You can read all the complaint and all the stuff that we've written and submitted to the courts as well. Especially those lawyers who are listening will have a good time reading those things, I'm sure.
Great. Jeremy, I'm going to throw a surprise question at you here. What's your favorite scripture?
1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer for those who, and now I'm going to butcher because you asked me to do it on the fly, but always be prepared to give an answer is the part that I cling into, and do it with all charity or something like that. And forgive me, that's the new Jeremy version that I'm putting together on the spot there. But people can go look that up. It's the always be prepared to give an answer part that I cling to. To do it with all gentleness and humility, that's a little bit more difficult for me, and that's my own self-reminder given to me by the scriptures to be a little bit more gentle than perhaps Jeremy is naturally. But praise God that he's at least given me that challenge in that verse to be prepared to answer for the hope of the gospel, yes, but also for people who deserve justice. That's sort of how I've ordered my life.
Yeah, as soon as you started reciting it, I was like, how perfect. That is a perfect verse for the work that Jeremy is doing. That makes so much sense. Well, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you for all of the work that you did on behalf of Heartbeat of Miami and for your heart for pregnancy centers. And let's continue this conversation.
And that sounds great. Thanks so much for having me and for all the work that you at Heartbeat do.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. And thanks, Jeremy and First Liberty, for the work that you're doing for the pro-life movement. I'll have that website that you had mentioned linked in the show notes for our listeners to click on if this is a call to action for some of them, some of the pregnancy help organizations that are listening. A quick reminder also to our listeners to share this episode if you found it helpful and subscribe for content like this in the future. We hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Pregnancy Help Podcast.